Hey everybody, it is Alex Hoerr from Optimum Joy, and I am very, very excited because Priscilla Dean from Evergreen Counseling is here to talk about Enneagram coaching. And if anybody knows me, I feel like well, maybe you've actually probably sat in a workshop I've taught here in Chicago on the Enneagram. And I just want to say that Priscilla is actually further along than me by like leaps and bounds in the Enneagram. So I was just excited. We're actually gonna do a three-part series. So today we're just gonna talk about like what is the Enneagram, how she stumbled upon it, and her coaching, and maybe the nine types. And then we're actually gonna get into two more conversations on the center. So the head, the heart, and the body or the gut, and then the subtypes, how actually there's not nine types, there's actually maybe 27, but I'm sure that Priscilla, you would have more to say on that. So,
Yeah.
um, but maybe just as we kind of get started, Priscilla, I want to read this little section from just like how the Enneagram helps you to see yourself. And then I would love just to hear how you like came to understand the Enneagram, mostly to hear some of your story, but then so people can kind of understand what the Enneagram is. So let me read this real quick.
Absolutely.
The Enneagram allowed me to see myself in the most accurate way that others saw me. I always struggled to see myself clearly, suspecting my judgment of myself to be cloudy and difficult to discern. What do others really think of me? I've often wondered. Along my journey of studying the Enneagram over the years, I have found it to be a powerful tool. The Enneagram is a lens through which I can see myself more accurately and confidently assess what needs to change. Very nicely put.
Thank you.
So, so tell me, how did you come to understand the Enneagram?
Oh, well, this is kind of weird. Kind of by accident. I didn't have anybody that knew it when I found it. When I was in college, I was internet surfing, as we called it back in 2007, or
Yes.
gosh, no, before that, 2005. I really liked personality tests. I was a psych major, and I just loved like trying them out. My friends and I would take them together and compare notes. So I did the Myers-Briggs, and I did these other ones that I mean, that are just fun, that are like in, Cosmo magazine. I just liked all of them. Anyone I can get my hands like, clearly I was looking for something. And I found a very tiny, like bad website. Like it was like not nice, it was at all, but it had a test on it. And it was called the Enneagram, and I just found it like surfing, and I was really random. And it was like scary accurate. And again, I didn't find that I was a 9, by the way, and I gave that away right now. I
Oh.
didn't find that right away, but my friends were like floored, and it seemed like I had stumbled upon something like bad. Like it's so good
Yeah.
bad. So like I was like, oh my God, this is like something occult maybe. So I didn't like tell a lot of people because I went to a pretty conservative Christian college. So I like keep that on the down low. So we would like put that in sort of like our way of hanging out. We would like do the Enneagram together.
Yeah.
And so that was really how I found it. And it was a really interesting way to talk about myself and my friends. We talked about it and we were like, wow, yeah, this is really uncomfortable and true. It wasn't just like, oh yeah, I'm like outgoing and I like to be with people, or I'm introverted, or I like to get things done. It was
Yep.
like, I really fear you might not like me, and like I really am driven by that, and or I have really merged with people's experiences, and it was like such deeper stuff. As a 19-year-old, I was like, whoa, this is something cool. And so I went ahead and
Yeah.
bought the Blue Book Bible, the Wisdom of the Enneagram by Ruth Stone Hudson, and I still have that copy from back
Yeah.
then. And it's well weathered at this point. And no one I had heard of, again, no one I talked to since then. Like a couple of years went by, I went to graduate school for therapy, and no one had heard of it. I didn't even bring it up
Mm.
in grad school. Like they weren't talking about it when I was going to graduate school. And then finally, Ian Cron wrote that book, The Road Back to You, in like 2000.
Right.
Lord, what was that? 9, 10, maybe like 10 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know when he wrote it, but when he wrote it, all of a sudden, everybody at church was talking
Everybody.
about it. Everybody like, and I was like, oh, wow, cool. Okay, I can talk about it with people now, because I had been starting to use it very carefully in my private practice outpatient work. I would
Hmm.
just be like, hey, let's talk about your personality, and like bring it. I don't know what
Yeah.
I was doing. I was just like, And some people were like, wow, this is really helpful. And there was such overlap with emotional issues people were having and looking at themselves more accurately. And I was like, this matches. And so I was using it very like lightly in therapy, but again, I didn't get any training on it. It was just something I've always liked. So, and it was for me specifically it took a while to figure out I was a 9. And as I've typed to the people now and I've coached and stuff, it's pretty common of an experience to not know your type immediately. I know that was your experience.
Yeah.
as
Oh
well.
yeah. That was definitely my experience. Yeah.
And so like, that's part of the journey, as I've kind of understood that to be true too, is that it's not just like I don't know, you start here and then now you're here and you're done. It's kind of just, you keep evolving and developing understanding of yourself in new ways. And so my 9 experience, like as I wrote in that pamphlet, is very like, how do people think of me, is very murky, and it really does like very others centric, which is not experience of an 8 or like other types, or other, there are 7s and 8s and other types that are more, self-referencing, and mine was like, I don't really know where my boundaries end and yours begin. That is such a 9 thing. And so like that helps like define that. But again, it's very like, I wouldn't have found that without the Enneagram. So it's very helpful to really keep an eye on my shadow self, is how they kind of call it. And to be like, you are constantly losing your boundaries, Priscilla.
Yeah.
So, to the vibes of what you're taking from other people and like what is really yours, like as like a homing device and grounding. So that's kind of my experience with it, background. I went ahead and got certified a couple years ago. Not even a year and a half ago. In that, like you have to. And I mean, but that seemed like it was just like extra. I love talking about it and doing it. And my lens is Enneagram most of the time. Like, I'm kind of obsessed. So
Yeah. Well, I feel like once you go Enneagram, you don't really go back. It's kind of like once you go to like Mac, like Apple products, you don't really go back to PC. I feel like once you go Enneagram, you don't really go to any other person. But I think that really what I find it to be most helpful, and you touched on it when you said like, oh, this is deeper than just really essentially like behavior. I think that a lot of
yes,
times, and a lot of times I think people misuse it to be like a
yes,
behavior type of test, but really
absolutely.
the reason that it's hard for people sometimes to even type is because it's that motivation. It's like that deeper
Yes,
layer.
it's very
Even,
hard to measure
yeah,
motivation.
exactly, exactly. Because even I remember, my what I was telling you recently, my coming to the Enneagram was in a room full of 20 something therapists here in Chicago, actually. And
So fun.
well, nobody tested like one of the assessments as an 8 in the room, and I tested as a 3 at that point in time. And our speaker, she ended up making a wisecrack about, who, you know what, like they're probably never like. It's a good thing there aren't any 8s who are therapists because 8s would make terrible therapists. And I remember
Oh,
looking at my
that's
report. Oh, it was
terrible.
terrible, and
I'm
she was.
horrified.
Oh, you know what? She was being so funny, actually. Like, there's some
Oh yeah,
context
they
to
just
that
joke. There's
story.
jokes, but like, what if there's someone like, and then you ended up being an 8 therapist. But
And
that's really common. It's really common to stereotype. God, we could go into that for
exactly.
a while.
Yeah. And my thought in that moment, I looked at my report and I thought, ooh, I really dodged a bullet because 8 was one of my next highest on this report. And I thought,
Was.
oh my
Of course it
gosh.
was. And you and maybe other people as well,
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
eight and like 8 really gets a lot of bad rap, especially for women. And
Yeah.
so that's a tricky one. And there's other ones that get bad reps for other reasons. 9s almost never
Yeah.
do, because we're working very hard for make you like us, because we don't know who we are. So
True.
but you definitely like me. I can make sure that happens. But otherwise, I mean, that's hard. I think like that's a really common problem with
Hmm.
people's first introduction to the Enneagram. And it is really the you boxing me in, or like you're stereotyping me. And these people are right. There is a lot of misuse of the Enneagram. I think the only teacher that's really big on ethical teaching of the Enneagram is Beatrice Chestnut. Um, they had a really great podcast recently, her and Sigourney Pais, on the ethics of it. So if anybody wants to listen to that, I really urge you to check it out. So she had this really great hour of just talking about how to use it ethically. And she has it in her book, oh, what is this called? Then the word Enneagram, we're using Enneagram in the workplace. It's like career based and more like,
Oh yeah. Yep.
it's really helpful. I think you've read that one. It's really
Hmm.
good. And she has a whole chapter at the beginning about ethics. But again, no one, the random Instagrammer who's like super into it and uses it all the time has probably not read that and probably should, because of that like kind of damaging teaching that can happen by accident without real like um, pure motives. Most of the time, they just are excited about it and they just want to like make jokes and
Yeah.
but Enneagram can be used very superficially too, like you're saying, like you can stay in the realm of just types and like I'm this type, you're this type, and this is how we get along,
Hmm.
or this is what we fight about, and this is the again very behavior, or
Yep.
like this is all my issues, these are all your issues, and I've got us all figured out. And that is again, I wouldn't say that's unethical. It's just more of you're going to hit a wall, and you're limiting yourself as a person and the other person as well. You don't allow for any development as a person or growth, and you're missing the whole point that the Enneagram has a huge teaching called the essence, which is who you really are
Yeah.
without your type.
Yep.
That's the whole
Yeah.
point, is to step out of the type and discover who you really are and who you've always been, really.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I think that the Enneagram dovetails so nicely with what, like, obviously you do short-term coaching work, but we are both also therapists, and
Yes.
use it in kind of like therapeutic context and work and stuff like that. And I think that because it is really rooted in something substantial and
Mm,
core about who you are, because, what is personality? Like the word is rooted in the mask, and how do
yes.
you put on a mask of personality where
Yes.
your true face is actually hidden, or your true presence or your
Yes.
true essence? And the Enneagram is kind of like, oh, what maybe behavior, motivation, all this different stuff do you put on
Yes.
to hide some of that soft, vulnerable, tender
Yes.
essence part.
And
Yeah.
people don't even know they have that. The idea is that, so I think Sandra Maitrey, one of the teachers, talks about it, remembering it, that you forgot that's who you are. You
Mhm.
think
Oh,
you're
yeah.
the type. You think that you're an 8 or a 9 or a 3 or whatever. You think you are that. And this is when you say, hello, my name is, you have these, function type out there and you're presenting yourself that way. And you really start to buy your own shit.
Yeah,
You start to
honestly.
buy it. You do, and we all do, and that's pretty normal to some a point. But we forget that who we really are, like you're saying, it has so much vulnerability, so much realness, so much presence, and so much even childlikeness and creativity
Mhm,
that isn't maybe like manufactured or just based on function. I was just thinking that the type is really about functionality. It's very important.
mhm,
We need our type.
mhm.
It's not something to like be shamed about. It's just more of like we need it to function, but it doesn't allow us to love others, to connect with others. That's more of
Yeah.
our essence and who we are.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Even, when I think back to my um transitioning from a 3 to an 8, really maybe you could say, I think that I very much so lived my life out of 3-ness because
Mm,
my especially in those years when I was first coming into it, just in starting the practice and different things like that, it was a lot of do it and do it well. So a lot of
yes.
behavior of the 3, but then to really kind of get into it and be like, oh no, fear of failure and all that different stuff doesn't really get me. It doesn't like do
Mm,
something for me. So
yes.
yeah,
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 and instead there's more of work, like deeper work of like what is truly true about my motives versus what I want to be true or hope to be true. Like, or what
yep,
sounds good.
yep,
And it's usually not that pretty, and usually we've worked years to avoid it. And so
absolutely.
the deep the deep work of the Enneagram is not for everyone nor for the faint of heart, I would say. I think though, if you're brave and curious, you can go pretty far with it.
Yeah.
Um, and I like it. I'm still learning about it, which is cool.
Oh, same.
Um,
And it's
it's
fun.
great.
I think it's a lot
Yeah,
of
it is
it
fun.
ends up being a lot of fun too.
It really,
So,
it really is. Mhm.
mhm. So what about, like, I always kind of think, man, to move on to some of the other aspects that you and I are going to talk about in the next 2 conversations, we really kind of need like a foundation, especially for the people who have no idea or they've never
Sure.
heard like the 9 core types and stuff like that. And I know that you've gone out of your way to kind of specifically put your own language or make sure that
Mhm.
like how you're describing them kind of fits with just that different stuff. So if you would be so inclined, could you walk us through the 9 types in however way you think is best?
Sure, that's fine. Do you want me to define the Enneagram for people that don't know what it is
Yes.
as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Why not?
I've worked hard to kind of define it because people are like, what is it? And I'm like, well, I used to say it was like a personality inventory, which it kind of is.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I feel like an inventory, like, I don't know what that means. Beatrice Chestnut calls it a map, and I like the word map for it. I think that it is a guide and a map to the personality. And it also is a tool that should be used both psychologically and spiritually. And so to use just one or the other usually misses the depth to it. And I think that it's really important to understand each 9 types with the lens of understanding that there's more to just the type. And then it's a map. So it's not any definition, it's like a way.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like an arrival. It's not a place on the map, it is the map. And it's also not a personality test. There are plenty of personality tests on the Enneagram out there, and some of them are very good, and some are not. But that's not what it is. It's simply a way of looking at yourself. Jerry Wagner, one of the teachers, calls it a lens, a perspective. Beatrice Chestnut calls it a map. Those teachers call it different things, but I kind of like it as just a way of guide of going forward and looking at yourself, so of development. So that's kind of my definition, if that makes sense. I don't actually have my handout in front of me, so I don't remember exactly all the ones I wrote because I love, like, the type 1, for instance, is known as not the mediator, the reformer or the idealist. And what other one did I come up with after that? Maybe you should go through.
Yeah, let me help you. This will involve me in your education. The perfecter.
The perfecter, yes. Instead of the perfectionist, which I don't love for type 1, because all types struggle with perfectionism. Perfectionism is just shame, in another word. So, okay, so like that's why some people are like, oh, they're just perfectionists. That's incorrect. The perfecter means they always can see the whole of something being better. Like, I want to perfect this. So that their ego is stuck on perfecting something, not on be perfect or being perfect. That's kind of a limiting kind of idea of the one. The type 2 is the helper. I don't think that usually has another name. Sometimes people call it the lover, like something like that. I've seen that for the 2. It's a little less common. I think I came up with
the caretaker.
Caretaker.
The caretaker,
yes.
The nurturing one. Yeah.
Nurturing. Yes, they're very naturally others oriented, and so the caring for others is very, like, their ego is focused on you. It's not on themselves, other people. So 2 specifically are others oriented, and they care, and that's how they do it. So they're not always helpful. Like, again, so you have self-preservation 2s, but I'm not going to get into, but it's a kind of 2 that is not like, oh, what can I do for you right now? And that's like the stereotype of the 2. But if you're going to go with nurturing, all 2s tend to be very nurturing and tend to be very caretaking in certain ways, whether it's subtle or overt ways.
Yeah. Yep. What about the 3?
The achiever, or I think that's the main one that's called.
I feel like I'm quizzing you on these.
I don't remember. I wrote this like a year ago.
I don't mean for it to feel that way, but that's what I started.
It's funny. I think this is good because I actually think I need to write these down and put them on my website, because I think it's helpful for people to kind of see my perspective of the types, because sometimes the terms for the types are limiting, and that's why I created my own. So the 3 is the achiever, but also known as
the efficient one, or the successful person. Yes. Yep.
Okay. I think they value more. I think achieving is important, but they really value efficiency. And what was the other thing I said? Efficiency and what?
Successful person.
Success. Oh yes, success in whatever they decide is success. It's very or what other people think is successful. I think I should say, not what they decide, because they are others referencing 3s are. So they think about what success is, and that's what drives their ego specifically.
Yeah. Yep. What about the 4?
Individualist. I don't love the term individualist or the artist. Sorry, we still have some. I don't like the artist that much.
Well, it's interesting because 8s are also incredibly individualistic.
Yes,
so to have the 4s only have the individualistic title. That's true. So many are. I just think because I'm egocentric about the 8, and I'm like, I'm an individualist as well. But yeah.
Yeah, and most fours I like don't like either of those titles. And so I think I came up, oh, I don't remember. You don't have to tell me.
Yeah, you have two. You have the dreamer and the intense feeler.
Oh yes, the dreamer. Yeah, so I think I put two of them because I always think of subtype when we'll go in our third session, because sometimes the intense feelers don't always look like intense feelers, but they're feeling that intensely internally. So you may not always be able to tell. Self-res fours is a classic one. And I would say they do tend to dream more. They tend to have a lot of fantasy life. All fours do. So they have dreams about the future, dreams about the past, mostly the past. And like this is where their focus of their attention is. Usually about envy, but it's like, I guess into the vice a little bit, but that's the four specifically. So I wanted to take out the artist because it tends to be, again, limiting, and so is the individualist, and I have it be about feelings, which is really a better way to kind of identify as a four.
Yeah, well, I think especially in kind of that heart center. And also, something I'm pretty big on, I don't know how this has developed in me, but I'm a very broad definer of what is creative. And I would imagine
Yes,
you
and we
are
should be.
exactly.
I love that.
And
Yes.
I especially probably you and I both as therapists and into the Enneagram is kind of like, it doesn't have to be art as we would narrowly define it, artist. It could be
Mm-hmm.
someone who is creative and pours a lot of creative energy
Absolutely.
into
And
a lot of what
anyone,
they do.
exactly.
Yeah,
And
engineers, anybody can be an
yes,
artist. Yeah.
I agree. And I don't like we limiting terms like that are like, oh, these are just the only type that are creative. I think
Yep.
that there's a four Facebook group that's always talking about that annoyance of the another types like, we're creative too, and it's true. I mean, the twos always think they're the most empathic and they're most helpful, and that's not true. Empathy is true among all the types, and so is shame and pain and suffering. So it's like, again, stereotypes, problems. Same with the artist and creativity for sure.
Yep. What about type 5?
The observational, why can't I say it? Investigator,
Observer.
sometimes called, or the observer, yes. And those are fine. Kind of makes them sound like they all are like walking around with like a what's the word I'm looking for?
A magnifying glass.
Magnifying glass, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's not really the case. And they're not all into science either, which is why you think of observation, like, oh, they're like science. It's like, no. So again, some of these limiting terms. So I think I
really like that you have the objective perspective here.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. That's what their ego is focused on, and finding the most objective perspective, which is usually science, but not always. Sometimes they don't always see their bias in what science they choose to like highlight. So again, this is all ego, and I'm married to a lovely 5, so this is also probably why I picked that title. But objectivity seems to be the most important versus simply observing. Although I will say that observing is a really good also title for the 5, because there is this detachment. They experience life going through, like kind of just watching life versus their struggle to participate in life and to do. So like, I think that's so I think 5 ego can be stuck between, finding the object thing, and then also, observing that and then staying there.
Oh yeah. Yep. Well, especially, I think that,
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say they're kind of like a shift. It almost feels like a shift to go from a 2, 3, 4 into like the 5 space. And it's kind of like, oh, even as we describe it, it's very heady, so
it's
just to kind of like land.
Yes, they over-identify with their thoughts quite a bit, as like who they are, versus their emotions or what they sense to be true. And so the thoughts and objective thoughts especially is, the highest good to them, and that's really their ego, and that's kind of for the 5 to step out of, that's tricky. So when you have a 5 wing 4, those are very interesting mix of people because they have a lot of deep feelings usually, but they're always constantly like putting it under the microscope a little bit and looking at it. So I love 5 wing 4s. They're interesting people.
I've heard it said, I don't know if this is against ethics or not, but that if you're a 5 wing 4 or you're a 4 wing 5, you get stuck in that existential hole right there at the bottom.
Yes. Did I hear that? I love that. Oh my God. Yes. The existential curve, I think, is just like this little part at the bottom of the symbol of the Enneagram. it's kind of like in its own zone. And yeah, there's like the deep existential questions. I think there was a hilarious, right there, right there. There's no line connecting like it to another type right there on the bottom. That's why it's a hole, or like it's missing it. So the idea is like the bottom falls out and they're all like kind of drifting in an existential crisis most of the time. That's kind of a sad way to put it, but I think there was a hilarious 5 meme I saw in the group that said like, how many like existential crises have you gone through? And like these people are like smoking and like, oh, like 5,000, who cares at this point? Like I'm like totally butchering it, but it was very funny because I illuminated the fact that they really ask the deep questions because they want to find out what's real. And I really do like it about 5s. And all the rest of us are just trying to like get through the day half the time.
Yeah. Well, I think that 5s can come off to other types as almost like robotic or non-human.
Yes.
But I think when you think about it in the sense that they're in these existential, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to live in the world? Who are, that actually is deeply human.
It's so human, right? And we need them to ask those questions.
True.
For reals.
Yeah. What about type 6?
The loyalist or skeptic. I don't like the skeptic. It's kind of negative. I mean, all the ego is technically negative, let's be real. But I kind of didn't like it as much because not all 6s come off as skeptical, especially the warm 6s, which are like the phobic 6s. They tend to be the social 6s. They're very warm. They don't come off at all as skeptical. And so it can really throw people off. So I think, I don't remember what I put for it. What did I say for this one?
You have the defender and the dependable one.
Oh, yes. Their focus of attention sometimes, so the reason why I did 2 for this one again is because of subtype. The defender is really about defending their beliefs and what they feel is safe, because again, they're focused more on safety. So they might be defending a person, they might be defending a belief system or traditional set of values. And then the my brain, sorry, short-term memory. The other one was dependable. Yes, dependable. I think all 6s are fairly dependable. So if I'm going to pick one, because there's that loyal piece to 6s, that I think they're focused on being dependable. And it can be, again, a flaw, like all ego can be. They can be loyal to things and go down with the ship when they should have probably abandoned the ship a long time ago. Bad jobs, bad relationships, et cetera, et cetera. That loyalty is the highest good, because it really isn't about, I love you and I'm loyal to you. It's really about safety and security. So that goes back to the 6s need and focus on that. So, but they are, as the high ego good they bring is a lot of dependability, a lot of, they're really good friends. They give the best gifts. They just do. I mean, I think 3s do too, but 6s are they really are thoughtful, because they have this like, our bond is important to me. They have this like, you're important in my life. They're dependable when you need them too. So I don't like the skeptic. Or the loyalist is probably similar to dependable, but that's what I came up with.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about 7?
Adventurer, enthusiast. What did I put for that one?
Oh, I wasn't even reading. Joyful enthusiast and risk taker.
Oh, risk taker. Yes. I think all 3 7s, the subtypes anyway, are risk takers. It depends on how much they need to avoid pain to the extent that they will take a risk. And they are very enthusiastic and adventure lovers, most of them, although the self-press 7 and the social 7, they will do those things, but typically like the presentation isn't always like, oh, let's go bungee jumping, or like, let's go do the next fun thing, which I think is again a stereotype. They are just simply looking for, they'll do new things as a distraction, and if it's newer, that's better usually.
Yeah. Yep. Makes sense. What about 8s? Well, I think that's let's talk about the 8s, and then we'll talk about the 9s, which is what you are.
Get to the back, get to the end. The 8, the challenger. What I think I liked the name I came up for this one. What was it?
Well, you have the fighter, the powerful person.
Oh yes, the fighter. There is this sense of like needing a fight to fight that I found with 8s. What do we do when there's peace?
Yeah.
Oh no. Which is funny because they're right next to the 9. So like there is that fighter, but I mean, good news is that life is full of fights usually, and usually in the right settings. 8s, we need them. But the ego, the shadow side is, I don't know what to do when there isn't a fight. So I'll probably
Yeah.
just start one.
Right.
So
You know,
there's so much energy inside that 8 in the body and the mind, and it's like, it's got to go somewhere. And what was the other one? I said the fighter and the powerful one. Yes. 8s are focused on power dynamics. Yes.
oh yes.
Like they
That's
walk
like
into a
the
room and they
only
know who's in
language I
charge.
speak. Yeah.
They know who's in charge. You know, they know like who's not in charge. There's also like that end of it. It's not always like, I'm going to dominate. It's like, oh, this person will not ever speak up for themselves. So I'm very aware of that.
Yeah.
And so there's like there's a defender piece to that too, I think.
Yeah.
Like this counterphobic 6, but there is this sense of because they're body type, this is again out of the head types now, because they're a body type, they're using their senses and their vibes to find out the power. And so they may not even be able to articulate why they think this person is powerful or why this person feels, it's just yeah, the head maybe isn't really clicking about why, but they can tell you, and they don't like it.
Yeah. You know, I'm just like kind of chuckling to myself because I'm thinking about how I was listening to some type of training that had to do with just kind of how therapists can best support people, just as we, walk through like Black Lives Matter and all those different things. And one of the therapists said that it is a therapist's job to overthrow systems of oppression internally
Oh
and
my
externally.
God.
And I was
here for
like,
that.
yes. Oh, and I was like, I'm in love with that. But then now I think, oh, of course I resonated with that in my fighter
Sure.
defend,
To fight. Let's find a fight to fight. Let's do it. I
exactly.
mean, but it's true though, there is so much to fight in this world, especially oppressive systems. So I think I love aides that do that work. And to yeah, I love that quote. I'm thinking about that. That is so true. Not too many therapists think of us that way, and I'm really growing in that area too, because as a 9, I've kind of learned to avoid fights at all possible. But my growth has been to be like, I'm going to defend you. I think this matters. I defend this belief system, etc. That's not natural, but I think that therapists and mental health, like all of this is related to fighting the good fight. I think ones have a lot of that Reformation energy to change for the good, to perfect things that are broken. And to like, and then again, more, I think the body types seem to be more focused on it because we sense something is wrong. We may not be able to we don't have a lot of feelings about it in our heart space. Maybe we should. Alex, we need to feel about it. Whatever, but we need some heart types in our life. And we may not think and be able to have a 5-step plan about how to do it, but we know it's bad and we're going to talk about it. So like ultimately, like, or we're going to fight wherever, like sign me up to go to the protest. Let me write a blog about it. Let's talk about it. We're going to be more willing to do, because I think body types are more doers. So yes, good anecdote. That's helpful.
It is interesting, I think, in light of this conversation before I move to the 9, I was just telling somebody that, because I actually find myself in a little bit of a existential space lately myself. It's different, and it's a really hard space. Is it Thomas More has the title Dark Night of the Soul. It's just I find myself presently kind of in some of that space, and I had a thought the other day. This one feels different than hard times I've experienced before, because before it was always something external I was fighting. And this time it feels internal. It feels like I'm fighting myself. And it is, and you can just imagine all that energy turned inward.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That's all I got to say about my existential crisis right now. But
you take up some boxing.
Yeah, seriously.
A lot of something going on in there. Woo, good for you though. I mean, I think those are the most important fights to fight though, to some degree, is with our ego, to wrestle with it and say like, because sometimes the ego can really fight back. The type is like, no, this is who you are. You are this 4, you are this 7, you are this 1. It's like, no, I need you, but that's not who I am, and like, I think the fighting with also like what you've always been taught, and that goes into our ego a lot too. Like, I think people mistype themselves because their parents have told them they need to be that type. In fact, I don't really agree with tri-types a little bit. And again, I'm kind of getting there on that. It's in evolution, but all that to say, like, I think there's a lot of parent involvement as a therapist, I think about that, how we form personality. Parents are the most highly influential to personality development for a child. And so like that can be also a big source of existential crises as well, like all the things that we believed and now we don't anymore, or we think that maybe they're not true.
Exactly.
Like people that are
Yeah.
deconstructing their faith is a common
Yeah.
one too, or their religion practices, or even just like the role they played in the family. They've always been the helper in their family and maybe they never wanted to be.
Yeah.
You know,
Seriously.
like
Seriously.
that creates a lot of internal stuff that I'm sure you see with your clients too. It's like
Absolutely.
fighting with yourself is a lot of energy. And for an 8 especially, that would quite maybe be internally violent feeling sometimes. Give you some validation.
That's all I gotta say is I just have a nervous chuckle. But I feel like we should get into some of those questions, but let's finish with the 9 and then we'll move into
Yes.
some of those questions. And
Yes.
so, I mean, the peacemaker, the Zen one, the accepting person are the titles that you have here.
Yes. I almost think I'm going to change that one to the accommodating person now. Because I like accommodating better than peacemaker. Peacemaker sounds like you're getting in the middle of 2 people fighting and breaking it up. Most 9s, that's like their worst nightmare. So they're like, please don't make me do that. If we're doing that, you have a very stressed out 9 on your hands, and they are not going to do that naturally. So their ego might be thinking about doing that. And should I do that or should I not? But typically 9s are conflict focused. And so therefore we are so like avoidant of conflict that we accommodate. So the accommodation is why people freaking love us. We just will accommodate you all day long. To the almost at least extreme ridiculousness sometimes. Like 2s are also high accommodators. So I will say that there is a little bit of a difference, but 2s are not really doing it at all to avoid conflict. 2s will start a conflict if they think it will help you. But 9s are accommodating to hide themselves and to avoid conflict. So that's really, and when I say Zen one, let me explain the Zen title. The Zen one is really about internal peace and external peace. And I say peace kind of in quotation marks. It's fake. It's not real. We like, in our high self, we're actually pretty good at creating peace, but it's actually through conflict, ironically, and being ourselves and showing up. But usually there is this, and I think I illustrated this with certain 9s I've coached. I've actually coached a lot of 9s, which is kind of interesting, but it's like when there is difficult things in the world happening or in our family's life, we get a text message or we're scrolling through our social media, we are not clicking on the distressing things. We are going right past it. Even if it's like probably really important, and maybe in our neighborhood, something's happening, we're just gonna like go right past it. And the reason for that is not, because like we're just avoiding of things that are upsetting. It really is to protect this need to have internal peace in our minds and in our hearts specifically. We don't want to feel things and we don't want to think about things that much. We want to shut it all down. So the accommodating, it was mixed with the Zen. So it was hard for me to kind of do both. But I think the focus of the ego specifically is to find that peace within ourselves and other people. And we think we can do that by accommodating at all times.
Makes sense.
And the issue that I think 9s run into is that people validate this ego so much. Loved ones love it, and then 9s stay stuck, and that makes me mad. Because people are calling out you 8s all the time for how rude you are, or like intense you are, or too much, and that sucks for you. For 8s, it's not fair, but people aren't doing that to 9s. So 8s have kind of been a way to grow of like, maybe I need to be calmer or gentler or whatever, and 9s are like, I'm gonna keep doing this. People
exactly.
Like it.
Well, it's I love the word maladaptive because in there is adaptive. It's like it actually makes a lot of sense to stay doing what you're doing, which is to accommodate, but that mal is like the equivalent of
it's
bad, or something is like off about it. So it's like, oh, I'm going to continue to accommodate to be coping, and adaptive in my situation, but eventually it's not actually going to be good for me or the people around me,
Yes, agreed. It's not, it will absolutely hurt me and my relationships by accommodating constantly. It's not that 9s never can, and that's a question I get. Like, well, when can I accommodate? When is it okay? And I go back to like, your body will tell you.
Yep. Yep.
We're
Yep. Yep.
really out of control, and maybe you need friends with an 8 who tell you like you need to show up right now. But ultimately, like, no, it's like the sense of like, if you think something's wrong, you got to say it before it gets to be too late. Or if you don't like
Mhm.
that, you probably should say it. And
Yep.
again, you don't know why you like it. You can't give a 5-star point plan because that's in the head type area. You may not have a lot of feelings about it. You just know. And so then you can step into right action, which is the virtue of the 9, and coming out
Yeah.
of sloth. But anyway, that's
Yeah.
going into the other parts, but that's the
So,
9.
so let me ask you this. Well, and also too, I'm noticing how dark it is getting in my apartment. So I'm gonna go turn on my light. But but what I'm curious about is, um, how often, and so let me back it up and say that usually there's like a whole rhetoric within the Enneagram that nobody types you, you're supposed to type yourself, right? It's what resonates for
Yes.
you.
Yes.
But I'm curious, as someone who's taken a dive, how often do you come across people who you strongly wonder if they've mistyped themselves? I'm just gonna turn on my light.
That's a great question. Oh wow. This is my growth edge right here. I struggle when someone mistypes themselves. Um, it's common. People mistype them all the time. And as I said before, it is a journey. So I'm mostly like hoping that they figure it out and they keep looking. If I'm coaching them, I'll just be like, I think we need to look at other types and keep our minds open. So I'll be direct and say that because that's why they pay me. But if they're not my coaching client. If I'm like encountering them and we're talking in a group setting, I'll usually keep my mouth shut. It is their personal journey. Typically, I
Mhm.
do think it is, as I said, pretty common. Again, like I said, for several reasons, parents influence. I think people can really, especially oldest child, they really identify with parents' approval. And so there's a lot of the influence of either the parent being a certain type, and so they'll identify with that type, or the parents told them they were like similar to a certain type. The parents don't need to know the Enneagram, but it's just a role that you play in the family, so it can be
Yeah.
very
Yep. Yep.
strong.
Yep.
Um, and again, there's the other issue of subtype issues. They may not know anything about the instincts. I've run into teachers that have never used it once. And I'm like, well, you're missing out. And so because of mistyping, is that self-preservation 4s almost never get typed on a test. They just don't. They are intense feelers, but they look like 1s and they look like
Mhm.
5s. And it's just, yeah, they're going to be mistyped. And I keep that in mind if I'm talking to someone of like, there's probably some holes missing for very real reasons.
Yep. Yep.
Um, Now, if they're teaching other people, then that really is where I struggle.
Cha! You're coming for
I'm
him.
like, I'm just like, okay, let's be careful. um,
Oh yeah.
so, and I absolutely have been guilty of typing people, but before I got certified or even before I learned about the ethics of the Enneagram, I was like, oh, I think you're this, I think you're this. And I have really
Yeah.
had to retract that and apologize because you can get carried away in your excitement. And
Yeah. Yep.
um, I think that I didn't know the rules, and there isn't a lot of them. And I think that that's why I like doing things like this, because people need to understand a powerful tool needs to be used with responsibility.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
So,
And I think that remembering that at the end of the day, I can't remember who said this, but it's really sits powerfully in me, and I have to remind myself that at the end of the day, it truly is a tool for empathy towards yourself and towards other
yes,
people.
exactly.
Let's think about me mistyped, because like in my threeness, how could I, that I was putting on, how could I then still maybe continue to grow and be empathetic towards myself, even though it
Hmm.
wasn't maybe my core type? I think that
Yes,
people can still learn and grow if they're mistyped. But,
certainly.
I love what you said about like hopefully they kind of stay on the path and let like things just like continue to be revealed. And also, for me, I was like, ooh, like a 3, that's shiny, that's nice, and it's probably like, oh,
That's not how you're probably supposed to feel, but
no, it's shame, despair, found
yeah,
outness. No.
yeah. When you have the right type, you're gonna feel pretty bummed out for a while,
Yeah,
because it's like, oh no,
yeah,
this is actually something that I have to talk about now.
yeah,
But yeah, I think the journey is really important. I do. I think it's a development journey. I've always been in the, not here, not yet kind of thing. We're all like moving forward, and it's not predictable and it's developmental. So, and to develop is a lot of faith in what's going to happen next, and it's okay to have not figured it out yet. I think that in our consumeristic culture, we really want to understand what our type is and understand what our, partner's type is and our friends, and get it all done and move on to the next fun thing. And it's just like, you could do that with the Enneagram, I guess, but it's not going to be that helpful to your inner life or your relationships, and when it really could be. So
so let's think, just kind of thinking as we kind of move towards like ending here today and thinking about like what's going forward, but just for anybody who has begun their Enneagram journey, but also maybe people specifically who have not, what do you think is a good way to start the self-discovery process? According to you, like where should someone even just start?
That's a great question. I think I put this on my website. I had a blog that I wrote about like the FAQs, like common questions of the Enneagram. That's one of the questions I had, like, where do I start? I said a good teacher, a good Enneagram teacher that has taught it for a long time. Richard Hoerr, who I really love as a Franciscan priest and theologian, he has used the Enneagram as a Franciscan for a long time, but he used to say to his students that people shouldn't teach it until they've been using it for at least 3 to 5 years. And it's like something like that. Like it's like a long time before people start to use it, but that's not been happening. So you can find a lot of bad information out there, even harmful information about there, or just confusing. There is the Enneagram rabbit hole of the internet, and I have found myself on such rabbit holes. And, it's just like, how did you get there? But okay, that's very interesting, and I still find it fascinating to click on, of course. But I think about people that don't understand it. So I'd say find a good teacher, whether that's on a podcast or a coach. And if you find a coach, make sure that understand who have influenced them most. And make sure, and I put on the website too, one of the questions, like, make sure that your teacher has done their own work. Like I'm talking about my background, and my like exploring being a 9, and I use that in my teaching. I'm not just doing it to talk about myself. I'm using it because otherwise I might be leading with my blind spots, and you don't know. You need to know my background. Like I've seen like these lists of all the lists on Instagram about like things that each type wants for Christmas or some garbage, and you can clearly tell this person is like a type 1 or a type 2 or something, because they're like giving themselves like the best, I don't know, a description. Typically their blind spots like clear as day to me, and I'm like, come on. I mean, obviously it's not that helpful and it's silly, but at the same time, like find a teacher that has examined their blind spots or working on them, and that's someone you can trust to help guide you. Obviously good books are really worth their weight in gold, and I've used them for years. I have some recommendations, and good podcasts. There are some good podcasts. There's also some terrible ones. Again, go back to their teaching philosophy, if they're ethical, if they talk about the ethics of it, how they use it well, or that sort of thing. So that's kind of what I would suggest people start. They can take a test. I know you did, Alex, and you found it to be very helpful. It's a great starting point. Tests are good starting points, but bad ending places. So
absolutely. I would say that it's more expensive to take
the good ones.
But something I will say, and this is because I'm like trained on this tool, so I might be a little biased actually. That's okay. But I would say if you're going to pay to take a test, you should take the IEQ 9. It's out of a South African company. And the reason I think that one is great is because it's they've worked really hard to make sure that 95% validity rate, which for anybody who doesn't care, it's basically statistically valid. It's like actually measuring what it says is measuring. And when you're looking at motivation, that's huge. Really, that's so huge. So
I think most Enneagram tests are missing that. Which is why there's so many inaccurate results. And I used to be anti-test until more recently, the past few years. I used to be like, don't take one. It's a waste of your time. Because a lot of them are. But I mean, there are the good ones, and you get what you pay for most of the time. It's sometimes the certain tests will churn out like 3 numbers instead of 1. You're like, oh, I'm equal across all 3. That's fine. Again, like as long as it's not an ending point.
It's a good starting
into those types. It's a great place to like read the types online that have good websites, like people that have like, because there's good information out there. And then compare it with a good teacher too, because there's, I guess some of them are really good with type descriptions, even subtype descriptions. And so that's a good way. And I would say the third way that people can kind of move forward is once they kind of are exploring their type and their friends or family are interested, is to talk about it. Again, do so ethically. Don't type other people. Be like, how do I come across to you? Do I have a lot of these qualities of, like, if I'm a 3, like, am I image conscious to you? Am I thinking about that? Like, and if you're a 3, your issue is self-denial. So you actually might really need some of that accurate reflection. It might be tricky. And so sometimes feedback from people that you would trust to tell you the truth, obviously not anyone. So I think that the Enneagram is so relational and interrelational. It can be really used, like you said, a tool for empathy, but also for self-discovery.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, here's the thing is, I know you have an event coming up that you're doing on December 3rd.
Yes. It's a Zoom event. Yes.
So tell us about that event, and then I'll kind of tell people about just the next 2 ones that you and I are going to be doing together. So
yes. So I was invited with actually a fellow therapist here at Evergreen, Ashley Roberts. She and I are big Enneagram enthusiasts, and they invited us, they meaning the Downers Grove Public Library. They do a lot of like intro events and expose their patrons to a lot of different kinds of information and cool things out there, especially during the times of COVID. So they invited us to do just an intro to Enneagram class. So it's not gonna be more than an hour, I don't think. And it'll be open to the public and free. So something that you guys can check out. And it should be fun. December 3rd, which I think is a Friday.
Awesome. Yeah. And, I'll make sure that, this video content gets posted in a few different places, our website, on our IGTV on Instagram, and then on our YouTube channel. So I'll make sure that somewhat, like whether it's your website or your Instagram handle, that people can make it back to Evergreen, which, you're probably the most rich resource of information for you guys. I would imagine it's evergreencounseling.co.
CO.
Yep. Perfect. But, I'm excited to have you back. I always kind of, this is terrible of me, probably. Okay. But I always think, okay, let's get the first conversation out of the way about the 9 types and all this different stuff, so we can get to like the goodies,
like the good stuff. I understand.
Yeah. So essentially, what I am excited to have you back is we're going to have Priscilla back for 2 more conversations. One on the centers. People call it different things, but for just the sake of, for right now, let's just say centers. But that's really, each of the 9 types fall in one of 3 centers, whether it's your head, like a more thinking, your heart more feeling, or your gut body, maybe more action oriented. Maybe that's, so just to kind of look at what does that even mean, and how does that translate to type, and how does it look different across types? And then the last time you'll be back, which again, it's almost like I feel like it gets better and better, is the subtypes.
And I want to go through all 27. Should be fun.
I think we should, honestly, like we'll have to be pretty quick, I think. But,
I know, right? I think so.
Yeah, but just the fact that it's like, oh, me being an 8 who is a social subtype makes me manifest into the world differently, feel differently than the other 2 subtypes of 8. So we'll go through all that, and I'm excited about that, truly, because I think that's where. Really fun.
Yes, I'm excited about both. They've been so helpful. The centers, I like to think about them as centers of intelligence. We usually like prioritize the cognitive one in American culture, typically, like, oh, you must be smart because you are a head type, and you think well, but really we undervalue the heart intelligence, like feelings intelligence, and then we think about in our body intelligence. So all sources of information that are really important for humans. So I love talking about that. And the subtypes are great for typing and also like self-observation. But I think they're even more important than the type. So.
And I will say, this is obviously who you referenced at the top of the hour, but if people are looking, if they're not at the beginning stages, they feel like they have a handle on their core type. If they're looking for almost what I think is Enneagram 2.0, I would love Beatrice Chestnut's book, The Complete Enneagram, which takes a deep dive into type. Yes. Yeah. This is what it looks like. And you'll see 27 Path to Greater Self-Awareness is the tagline. So she has done the most to dig into subtypes. Yeah. So
the only book of its kind, I'll say that. There's no other book I have found, unless someone can correct me, that actually has done as deep of a dive on the subtype and work on the vice with it. So Hoerr and Urania have a great podcast that I really like. They don't have a great PR and marketing campaign, in my opinion, because it's like nobody knows about who they are. But I think that's wrong, and I think everybody should. That is my primary like influence on that, and I think that that's a great place to start for people looking into more deeper work. Yes.
Perfect. Priscilla, thanks for taking an entire hour out of, I know you're an incredibly busy woman.
Yes.
So I just appreciate you taking not only 1 hour today, but then also like
yes.
what you've already committed to in future conversations.
So this does not feel like work. So like really excited. Awesome. Thank you, Alex, for inviting me. I'm very excited to come back to you next week. So we'll figure it out.
Perfect. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
See ya.